Hi, my name is Jay Sugarman, and I want to welcome you to Museum Open House. This ongoing series features and highlights many of the outstanding museums and other cultural institutions. The main purpose of most programs is to inform viewers about current and upcoming exhibits, various programs, resources, and other opportunities that are available for the general public. Today via Zoom, we're fortunate to have as our guests Jessica Roscio, Jennifer Davis Carey, and Scarlett Hoey, all of whom are associated with the Danforth Art Museum at Framingham State University. Jessica is the director and curator of the museum, and Jennifer and Scarlett have collaborated on the current exhibition entitled Not a Story to Pass On. During the program, we're learning why and how the exhibition came about. We'll go on a behind-the-scenes tour, and in the process, come to better understand and appreciate the nature of Jennifer and Scarlett's artistry and the primary intentions of their research and artwork. Let's start by meeting our guest and then finding out more about both the Danforth Art Museum and Not a Story to Pass On, which will be on display until June 2nd. Welcome. So delighted you're all able to be here.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah. Last week, I had the wonderful opportunity to visit the museum, tour Not a Story to Pass On. I found the ways you've integrated art and history very engaging, informative, eager to find out more and have you inform viewers. But before we jump right to that, I also think it would be of interest to briefly hear a little bit more about your backgrounds, perhaps professional art interest, and possibly current positions. Jessica, welcome again, and would you please start?
Of course. So Jay, thank you. Thank you for reaching out and for having us today. As you mentioned, I am the director and the curator of the Danforth Art Museum and School at Framingham State University. I've been with the organization for 12 years now, but not in those positions the whole time. I've been the curator since 2015 and the director since 2020. So I wear a lot of hats at the Danforth, but certainly my heart lies in curating exhibitions, and we specialize in all of our temporary exhibitions, highlight contemporary regional artists, which I absolutely love because we're lucky enough to live in Greater Boston, which is teeming with professional artists. I say that we have probably dozens of years worth of exhibitions if that's what I was allowed to do. So that's a little bit of my background.
Wonderful, wonderful. Jennifer, welcome. A little bit about yourself, please.
Sure. And thank you, Jay. Thank you for inviting me. I guess my background, I consider myself primarily an educator. My background is in education. Right now, I'm the director of a policy and advocacy organization in Worcester, the Worcester Education Collaborative. But my other passion is art, particularly enameling and photography. And so those are the two things. I joke that if you're looking for me, I am either at work, at the grocery store, or in the studio. So.
Oh, very convenient to find you then. That's good to know. Good to know. Scarlett, welcome. Please share a little bit about yourself.
Thanks, Jay. I'm Scarlett Hoey. I'm a photographer. I'm a 2012 Mass Art graduate. I studied photography and art history. With my professional hat on, I work for the New England Museum Association. And when I'm not either photographing or running after my toddler, I will be in a museum or an art gallery. And I live locally here in Worcester.
Terrific, terrific. Well, Jessica, moving on to the spring exhibitions at the Danforth, would you share just a little bit about them before we hear from Jennifer and Scarlett, and perhaps what connects them, please?
Sure, of course. We have three exhibitions right now, which I have said we should stop calling them the spring exhibitions because they open in February, but they are on view till June 2nd. But besides Not a Story to Pass On with Jennifer and Scarlett's work, we have an exhibition called Unearthing, which is the work of Sandra Matthews, who is also a photographer, and a group show called Harvest Foraged Found that has 5 artists in it, Bob Kephart, Saber Malik, Madge Evers, Linda Goldberg, and Sarah Sockbasin. And all of them are tied together in that they're looking at personal histories, collective histories, how we look at history today, how we reinterpret history, tying all of those threads together, how we present ourselves in artwork across media. So I tend to talk about all of them as looking at history or histories, and a lot of personal experience. They're 3 very distinctive shows, but as you walk through the museum, you'll be able to make connections between all 3 of them.
Nice. How about a few more words about Not a Story to Pass On? How did that come about and end up being put together the way we're going to be seeing?
Of course. So the exhibition actually went through a couple of iterations, which is nice when you have the time to plan an exhibition. I feel I cannot remember exactly how I met both Jennifer and Scarlett, but I know that it was through Arts Worcester, through work that they had been showing in Worcester, and also through our juried exhibition. And I had first started talking with Jennifer about her work soon after she had had a show at Arts Worcester of the Redemption series. And I did not know a lot about enameling, so we were talking about that. And we had started playing an exhibition with both the American Histories works and Redemption. And as the show started to evolve, it made sense to bring Scarlett's work in as well, because her work is also photography and tied in so much to the history of Worcester County. And so it was really nice to have these topics that were speaking to each other and this mix of media. And so that's how, and they have worked together as well. So that's really how the show came together. And it is in one of my favorite spaces in the museum, because I really love this gallery. It's a very intimate viewing space. It's kind of perfect for either an installation or a conversation between artists. And that's how I feel the layout is working with Jennifer's works, both talking to each other and then to Scarlett's work on the back wall.
Now, wonderful as we see here. And yeah, I couldn't help but think as you were mentioning, it looked like the exhibition that Jennifer and Scarlett worked together almost on a permanent basis, given the nice overlap and integration of their work. Well, for the sake of time, we're going to move on. And Jennifer, we want to first hear about your display over here, American Histories. A few words, please.
Sure. American Histories came out of a grant I had gotten from Arts Worcester to explore important points in American history from a different point of view. And I didn't want to just tell, I wanted to tell single stories, but I also wanted to tell a more global story. One of the comments that has always resonated with me was from a lecture I heard a number of years ago from Cornel West, when he said, we all need to consider our lives part of a narrative that is greater than ourselves. And I started to think about what that means in the context of individual lives and in the context of the sweep of history. Our family, my mother's side of the family, comes from Barbados. My grandmother emigrated here in 1906, and we had a lot of her things that she had carried with her from the time she came here through her, various roles as a mother, as a worker, that sort of thing. And I thought, how can I both memorialize this work, these things, these items, and put them in a bigger context, and tell her story. And so I created a series of shadow boxes, with those items. So one of them, the one on the top left, shows her. That's one called Club Women, and that is about the club women's movement that emerged after, during and after Reconstruction, with a lot of the women who had been educated in college or self-educated and became leaders in their communities. The series with my grandmother kind of draws in a little more. This is her club, which was a lodge in Brooklyn, New York. The Sons, it had a glorious name, the Sons and Daughters of Barbados and so forth. But most of them at this point were domestic workers. And I thought about the items that she saved and how publicly, yes, they were domestic workers. But privately, they were women who cared about their relationships with each other, their relationships with their family, clearly cared about fashion. And so what they were seen as publicly and categorized as was something very different from the way they saw themselves. And I wanted to recognize that. Later in life, my grandmother was one of the Rosie the Riveter women. She worked during World War II in the Brooklyn Navy Yard as a shipbuilder and had saved a lot of the memorabilia for that. Those are her discharge papers. I found she had saved some ration tickets that you see in the upper right-hand corner. She had saved her ID card and her ID bracelet, and then her picture. She actually, you can't tell from the picture, but she had a reddish auburn hair as a young woman. And you can see in that photograph, I suspect she dyed it because at that point it would have been gray. And I suspect she dyed it black to make herself look younger in the photograph. But that recognizes that period of her life and contextualizes it as part of a greater sweep.
Terrific, terrific. I know we could hear much more, but for the sake of time, want to move on to you, Scarlett, and to hear, as we see an overview here of the art presentation of what we're going to see here in plain sight.
Yeah, so as a quick overview, this body of work was supported in a grant through Arts Worcester and the Worcester Arts Council ARPA funding. So yay, funders, and thank you for supporting local artists. The body of work that you see here are gravestones of people who were enslaved in Worcester County using primary resource documents. We know that Worcester County had, several hundred enslaved people in the region. Boston was one of the main towns nearest to Worcester, but Worcester County has never really done a deep dive into looking at the history of enslavement. And here in Worcester County, many of the enslavers held positions of wealth and power. So here in the gravestones, we can see, Moses Gill, who goes on to become governor. 3 of these tombstones are actually people that he enslaved. They're buried in the Princeton Cemetery. This is Dinah, and this is in Oxford. And in addition to looking at these gravestones, we can learn a lot, not only about the way that language is important, because obviously you can look at this and it'll read a faithful slave, but another one might say servant. And so we can have a discussion about when those language shifts happened and why it's important now as we think about language to use the term enslaved or a person who was enslaved. We know through records that even London here initially was, fought over which town would take care of him in his older age after being a veteran of the Revolutionary War. And we know that there were 13 people that enslaved him from those court records. This is a contemporary stone, and it wasn't placed until closer to, the bicentennial of the 1970s. So I think you can learn a lot based on even just exploring history records and also going to see these individuals who were enslaved here in Worcester County. This is in Harvard, Massachusetts. This is Othello. He was enslaved by Henry Bromfield, and Bromfield is actually buried in King's Chapel, but Othello is here in the Harvard Cemetery. And oftentimes both with Eden and Othello and Dinah, you'll see that these individuals are buried on the outskirts of the cemeteries where they are. Othello was, back by a wall near a very large elm tree. And I think that also, speaks to how and where these individuals, were buried, and it can be cause for a larger conversation. But I think the next three tombstones that you'll see, which is Flora and Thomas and Nero, they were enslaved by Moses Gill, who goes on to be governor. But they're right in the center of the cemetery in Princeton, which is actually closer to where his plot would have been, in the center of the cemetery, which is very different than being on the outskirts. But these people were still owned and had lives and deserved to be respected and thought of as in a whole human form. And I think these gravestones are just one portion of starting to kind of help tell the story that slavery was, in plain sight here in Worcester County, here in Massachusetts. And, we don't always talk about that history, but it's very important that we do.
What got you interested in this part of history? And just a few words about how you go about your research and perhaps photography as well in a couple of minutes, please.
Yeah, so I photograph with a large 4.5 camera, so I'm using sheet film still, and then kind of digitizing those negatives. But with my museum hat on, I've been seeing, many people and museums start to, focus their lenses more on the stories of the history of enslavement and freedom in our region. And I think, it wasn't until I was, just after college that I had my first visit to the Royal House and Slave Quarters in Medford, Massachusetts, which I highly recommend everybody should go visit, because it's just a crucial part of our history in Massachusetts. But, the fact that there's an extant slave dwelling here in Massachusetts, and I didn't know that until my early 20s. I just wish that we'd been taught that in high school, right? And here in the North Shore area, there's the Marblehead Museum, which is just working currently to uncover a slave dwelling and kitchen connected to the Jeremiah Lee Mansion. So this work is still being done. And I think, this is the document, the photograph is the 1754 slave census, which the then Governor Shirley was requesting every town to record any individuals who were enslaved over the age of 16. So it doesn't include people who are under the age of 16 and enslaved. But, I know Framingham, I think, wasn't reported or didn't report, or we don't have the document, but neighboring towns like Natick included 3 women who were enslaved. Neighboring towns like Hopkinton included 15 people who were enslaved. So this photograph is a document of the returns from that census document, and this is just one example of those kind of primary source documents that I utilize in this research. And all the work that I've been working towards and putting on, it can be found in the NESRI, the New England Slavery Research Index database as well, to learn more and find primary sources. But there's slavevoyages.org as well, and 10 Million Names, and lots of resources for sure in this work.
And I found very helpful a QR code that accompanies your display to find out some more of the information that you just mentioned. Thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Jennifer, I want to go back to you and hear about your use of photography with the redemption display that we see here.
And this is probably one of the most controversial set of images that I've worked with. These were a set of images from daguerreotypes that were created in the 1850s, commissioned by Professor Louis Agassiz at Harvard, and photographed by Joseph Zeeley, who traveled to South Carolina to document the images of enslaved people who were either from the African continent or the first generation of American children born of enslaved people from Africa. They were photographed, excuse me, they were photographed by Agassiz to prove his theory of polygenesis, which states that Africans were of a separate descent from whites. And he took photographs that are, the individuals are naked, they're not nude, they are naked. Photographed in profile, full profile, and full frontal to demonstrate what he believed were the physical characteristics that proved his theory. The images were found in the late 1970s in a desk in the Peabody Museum of Ethnography at Harvard, and the controversy stems right there.
Mhm.
It goes to consent, it goes to ownership both of individuals, ownership of the photographs, the daguerreotypes. What struck me was, excuse me again, what struck me were two things. One, the differences in the facial expressions of all of the subjects, and how that to me how that spoke to me of what their experience of being photographed was. The other was what is so striking about the originals is the nakedness of the people. And my first instinct was these people need to have clothes on. And so I used Photoshop to put clothes on them. My close friend Peter Grigg helped me with the Photoshop. And then I used enamels to dress them. And have two types of clothing. One, as you see here, is traditional Dutch wax patterns that are popular in West Africa. And another set, which is Victorian clothing of the period, because photography at that point was so unique that people would have worn their Sunday best to be photographed. And so that's what I did. I also wanted, you see here, daguerreotypes. And so I spent a number of months hunting down daguerreotype cases because I wanted to add a sense of authenticity to these. And so they are in, the images are in daguerreotype cases with the subjects in Victorian clothing to represent what the images would have been had this been a serious photographic endeavor and not a racist endeavor on the part of Agassiz.
Now, fascinating use of the photographs to bring recognition and dignity to these individuals. A few comments about this aspect of the exhibition.
Sure. This is a piece called 60 Million and More. And 60 Million and More is the epigraph that Toni Morrison uses in her book Beloved. And it represents the number of people who were affected by enslavement. What you see here is a vintage slave shackle. A close friend of mine, Connie Rice, who's a civil rights attorney in California, collects slave memorabilia. And she gave me these shackles and said, please make something of them. And so what I did was take images of enslaved people, and also contemporary images of people imprisoned, because to me, the our criminal justice system, our carceral society, is an extension of enslavement, and that's what this piece speaks to.
And just a very brief word about what we see when we enter the exhibition, The Tree Bears Witness.
Mhm. A number of years ago, there was a report on the radio about a phenomenon in the United States of taking photographs of during lynchings. To me, this just amplified the horror of this. And I chose The Trees Bear Witness because to me, trees are one of the Almighty's most glorious creations. They are also one of the most, or the most long-lived creatures on our planet. And I think that the trees had to watch and once again, without their permission, participate in this abomination. And so there is a tree. This also is a shadow box. So there is a tree on the glass part of the shadow box on the cover. And then when the shadow box is open, there's a tree as a background, and then a cruciform image of 4 scenes of lynching with people getting their photographs taken in front of the bodies to be made into postcards.
It's very powerful. Again, could hear much more about it, but in closing, Jessica, what's been some of the reaction and feedback to the exhibition?
I would say overall, I mean, there's been a largely positive reactions to the exhibition. It can be difficult, but it should be. And I think that I mean, our visitors have spent a lot of time in it. There's a lot of information to gather, and you should take the time to gather all of the information that's offered by Jennifer and Scarlett. So I think, I mean, the feedback has been that this is vital work to be created and to be seen. It's been interesting as I've taken groups through how many people are familiar with the Zelie daguerreotypes. A lot of people are, and I think that makes sense. But also when you think about, early photography, they're thinking about the images in a different way than they're being presented. Jennifer has also provided a box with copies of the original daguerreotypes, which we keep closed, and we offer people the option to look at them if they want. And we found that that's gotten a fair amount of mixed reaction. Some people certainly want to see the original images, and some people don't. So it's been really fascinating to take people through, because I think both Jennifer and Scarlett's work say a lot about the history of photography and how images are created and how we view them now. And also I think that both of their work very heavily touches on, we always think about Massachusetts first as being very progressive and this birthplace in many ways of abolition. And there's a whole history that is before that time that we spend a lot less or no time on. And that's one of the really, I think, powerful messages of the exhibition.
Most definitely. Highly recommended, as well as what Scarlett mentioned earlier, making your way to the Royal House to really appreciate some of the history of slavery in the area. Unfortunately, we could hear more, but time is up for today. Thank you all so much for being here. Definitely encourage viewers to make their way to the exhibition, to the museum. A lot of time up until June 2nd, and continued success with future endeavors.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Also want to thank you for watching and hope you'll be able to tune in next time.